Going to welcome you. Welcome, Emil Benjamin, director and producer of Oyate. Thank you for being with us today. We are hoping that we can have a conversation around the showing of your film at UCSC this Saturday. And I just want to open up the conversation to unpack a little more information about the creation and the meaning behind the film. And so I'm going to go ahead and start with asking, how do you feel Oyate contributes to and elevates the conversation surrounding Indigenous rights and environmental justice?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me. We're very excited to screen with you on Saturday. Um, Oyate is completely centered around Indigenous rights and environmental justice. And I think one of the key elements of the film is highlighting how those things are completely intertwined. They cannot be separated because uh, the concept of Indigenous stewardship of the land connects Indigenous people to the land. And this is really the crux of the No DAPL movement. This was not just a company coming in and threatening the water supply for the Lakota Nation, but also their sovereignty as Indigenous people living here in these lands. And the way that Oyate got started, the way that the process of this film began was my co-director Brandon Jackson. He was there for the No DAPL protests, and this is all the way back in 2016, 2017. And there he met Jen Martell, our producer, who works on the Standing Rock Reservation, where the protests went down. And she's Cheyenne River Sioux herself. And they made a connection, and she told Brandon, she said, there is so much more going on here than a pipeline. And you should come back here and we should make a movie and we should tell these stories. And that's where the mission started. That's what the film does. It uses the No DAPL movement as a jumping off point to talk about the myriad issues that Indigenous people face, not just across the country, but across the world. And sort of how Indigenous issues really do affect all of us on the planet, because it is directly tied to preserving the environment and creating a sustainable future.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, as you're speaking and as I'm thinking about what you just said regarding Indigenous sovereignty, um, it just really hits home in the sense that I think probably every city and county in this nation has one issue or another that's connected to land. Um, and it's just really, as I think about the role of the Indigenous people, regardless of the tribe, you know, really learning more about this particular struggle, but then other struggles is essential for us. So I guess what I'm trying to say is maybe I think what's needed is to take the issues outside of naming them Indigenous issues, because they're not. It's the Indigenous people just happen to be the ones carrying the burden in the moment, but really it's for the benefit of everyone. So I think what we're seeing is an urgency around the issues that they've carried all along,
Mhm.
because we are facing the decline of our planet, and all of a sudden we're all at risk. So I just wanted to add that to the framework and maybe speak to it, or wondering if you have anything to say about that framing.
Sure. Well, I think that is the right way to frame it. That Indigenous issues are global issues. They're human issues. And especially when we're dealing with the environment, I think what No DAPL really helped to do was to wake up the world to a lot of these issues. And I think that Indigenous people, particularly the Lakota people in this case, did carry the burden of revealing a lot about what impact these extractive industries can have. Not just, I think it's easy for us. I speak for myself. I'm in academia. I'm a adjunct professor at Columbia, but I also, I'm on the East Coast. And I think that a lot of us folks, we really just, we're thinking about the climate crisis and we're reading the articles in the Atlantic about, the emissions, and on a scientific and global scale, that is of course an existential threat and rising, global temperatures. But what we miss in those bigger analytical frameworks is what happens on an individual and community level.
Yeah.
And that's what I think the No DAPL movement really elevated, that it's not just that this oil pipeline is going to, cause more burning of fossil fuels, which is going to raise the global temperature. We're talking about a pipeline that is going under the aquifer. It's the water supply for the Lakota Nation. And if it were to leak out, which, by the way, as we've come to learn through all this, most pipelines do. I think there's never been a major pipeline that has not had a leak.
Mhm.
It would seep into the Missouri River, and that provides water for millions of Americans. So there's in the environmental impact, there's the global scale, and then there's the local scale. And it's affecting not just people, not just us as a planet like 30, 40 years down the line. It's affecting people every day,
Yeah.
right now. So I think that's it was a great way to put it. So I'm glad you framed it that way.
Yeah, and I'm also, thinking about the spiritual impact, which I think is what is central to Indigenous activism and seeking of rights. I mean, we see, we hear the word rights, but I think what we're talking about, or what they're talking about, and what we talk about when we have extractions and intrusions on our sacred spaces and lands, is not only is there an extraction and an intrusion on the land, but as people that are connected to the land, that extraction is connected to our bodies and ourselves and our personhood. So I
Yeah.
think the bigger picture is how Indigenous rights can teach us to reconnect our spirits to the spirit of the land and have that be the guide for how we inhabit the land.
I think that's a wonderful way to put it. I think that we all have a lot to learn from these cultures, which, by the way, we're talking about 500 plus tribes in the North America alone. Um, but relationship to the land is sacred and it is symbiotic. That's what we're missing. I think that what modern society has wrought, and frankly what colonialism has wrought, is this idea of exploitation and extraction. What can we take? That we are somehow, as human beings, we are this thing that we dominate the land, we dominate the animal kingdom. We're supposed to dominate these things, and we're seeing the consequences of it now. We need to be living side by side with this bounty. We need to be interacting with and understanding that we are on the same plane as the flora and the fauna of the planet. So I think that there is a deep spiritual aspect to this for sure.
Yeah, and that taking that you're describing,
Mhm.
unfortunately, is at the expense of marginalized people.
Absolutely.
So I want to move into another question. Thank you for that. What inspired you to create this film?
Yeah, so chat about this a bit before, but I'll re-outline it in a more streamlined way. Um, so I co-directed this film with Brandon Jackson, who is an old friend of mine. We grew up in the same town, and we had lost touch for years, but we both had kept each other in the other's purview because we both had engaged in different causes. We were both, advocates. And, he went out to the No DAPL protests. He made some, relationships with people on the reservation. And it was Jen Martell, who was our producer, who, by the way, won the Courage Award at the Red Nation International Film Festival. So I was so happy that they recognized her because she really is, in so many ways, the heart of this project. She was the one who asked Brandon, please come out here and help us tell this story. Because to quote Jen, she said, there is so much going on here outside of the pipeline. There is so much more here than a pipeline. And that kicked off, she invited us to the Ochedi Shakowin conference, which was the first, sort of this conference that was a response to the No DAPL movement, and it was bringing people from the 7 bands in the region, in the Great Plains tribes together to figure out what the next steps are. But from being at that conference, we met our lead characters, Chase Iron Eyes and Phyllis Young, who are both incredible lifelong activists. I mean, at that conference alone, we must have interviewed 15, 20 people. And for the film, we interviewed about 60 people. We only use, I think, 13 or 14 in the film, and almost all of them are Indigenous voices. I think we only have 1 or 2 non-Indigenous voices. But the point is, when we were at that conference, it was centered on the pipeline, but we got into food insecurity. We got into land rights. We got into sorry, I'm just pausing here for 1 second. Oh, right. Sorry. Okay. So at that conference, we encountered a myriad of issues that Indigenous country is facing today. That is from food insecurity, that's lack of healthcare infrastructure, that is not having a seat at the table in policy making that directly affects Indigenous people. That's, the DSS in North and South Dakota, particularly South Dakota, coming to, taking Indigenous children off of reservations and placing them with white families for profit incentives. I mean, the list really goes on. And so Brandon and I, our job with this was to listen, to roll the camera on, and to see what issues were most pressing to the people that we were following. And then to just sort of, we were not so much the story generators as we were sort of the curators. We were like, okay, now that we have all this information, how can we thread these lines and understand that the No DAPL movement is actually connected to all of these things? And it's a history that goes back a few hundred years to the first contact with colonizers. And you'll see in the film that we are able to trace that line and to see how there's a cyclical nature of how history continues to repeat itself over the last few hundred years. And we're kind of still, more than feeling the reverberations, we're still in the middle of this thing that feels like a very old colonial project, but we're actually smack dab in the middle of it right now.
Yeah. So as we wrap up this discussion, what would you like as a main takeaway for those witnessing this film and attending the UCSC showing of it?
Well, first of all, I encourage anyone and everyone to attend the UCSC showing. I think, especially for young folks, this is a really galvanizing film. We joke that the first half of the film it is like it's doom and gloom and it feels insurmountable. But in the second half of the film, you really get to see, I don't want to give anything away, but you get to see how Indigenous people, and particularly these Indigenous activists, are making a change, are using this new moment of awakening to bring people to the front. And now more than ever, it does need to be a completely intersectional coalition. And I think what's great about Oyate, and a great reason to come see it, is you can really start to see some of the nitty-gritty details and inner machinations of how these oppressive systems work, and how to start to think about untangling them, because it does seem like this existential, insurmountable thing. But there are people out there who are dedicating their lives to figuring it out. And we follow some of those amazing people, and we have the pleasure to work with them and get to know them over the course of, 3 years of making this film. So I really encourage everybody to come out and, frankly, join the movement.
Thank you for all of your thoughts and words and encouragement, and we look forward to seeing you on Saturday.
Yeah, I look forward to it as well.
So the film will be showing at UCSC Merritt College, 12 noon on Saturday, with a panel discussion following. Hope to see you all there.